All right, welcome everybody to this episode of the podcast. Today we have Kevin from Applied Frameworks who's joining us, and we're going to be talking about how you align, the way you deliver your product to the way that you're commercially selling that product, and the details involved in there. So, Kevin, maybe you can start off with a quick introduction about yourself, Applied Frameworks, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thanks, Tim. Yeah, I've been in pricing as a specialist for 20 years now. I kicked off with a company that was a strategic pricing group. And I'd say I've been fixing pricing problems, packaging problems for 20 years. But what I observed over that time is actually more important, which is you start seeing patterns over time of how different businesses are either falling out of alignment on their pricing or how they're creating value and how they're capturing value. My partners in the company Applied Frameworks, they came at this from 20 years in the product development space, and specifically software, and how you actually develop build good pricing, good software. And we converged on these two things about 3 years ago, where we realized the product teams are creating value, how they define value, and then the value capture teams, pricing, the commercial side of the business, were actually defining value in a different way, and they weren't aligned. They're actually, so as I say, they're happening, but they're happening in different rooms. Alone, each is complex. You put them two together, it seem to be adding complexity, and there really isn't a solution out there that marries those two things together. And that's what we're working on. So it's the commercial architecture and the product architecture kind of combining to create higher performance for each of the features that you're building. Make sure that there's a commercial filter on that, not just an investment filter.
Yeah, and I guess you get into, like I said, it's interesting that two different rooms, right? Is mandate, hey, well, we want it on cheaper infrastructure, or we want to do something along that lines. And engineering says, wonderful, we're going to do this way of doing it, and it's going to have these incremental micro transactions. It's all going to be great. And then it gets handed over to the commercial team. They go, how am I supposed to calculate what I'm charging my customer on top of that, right? Yes, I wanted it cheap, but not like that. Is that kind of the disconnect that you?
Yeah, because that's the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, is under a cost mandate and trying to find the most efficient cost. But if his costs go up, they want to pass that on, which kind of goes through finance probably, right? And they say, okay, well, we'll just add on to price. But then the sales team is sitting there going, well, the value hasn't increased, but we need to raise prices. I mean, it creates a dilemma for them. That process only is pretty typical, that kind of linear process. That's only if you think of pricing as a process or a linear thing, and a lot of the pricing world, the experts that I've worked with would go from there out to the sales team instead of going back to the product team and saying, oh, how can you change the product you're bringing to market so that we can price them better? That sometimes happens, but often they're just building more features or more practice. And so pricing has these impacts. You want to increase your price, or there's an impact somewhere in the business that causes you to increase prices. It has a more systems type impact. They're connected pieces. So that's what we're trying to solve. We're more like a systems thinking as opposed to looking at it in individual pockets. And individual pockets are optimizing for the individual roles, not for the whole system.
Yeah. And maybe you can kind of dive in a little bit more of that on the systems thinking side of things, right? Like, share a little bit more about what you're doing there.
So we, and it goes back to those observations and patterns where I've seen patterns over time of, well, if you change price, if something changes in the business, then we need to price needs to, they say, okay, pricing go off and fix it, right? They'll change the price or something, or come up with a solution for that. But they're often fixing things that they didn't design in the first place. So I like to think of it more of it. The systems thinking is, are we designing how companies capture value, and applying that same kind of discipline to how we create value? And systems thinking, it just says, if you change one thing, then there's probably some unintended consequences further down that also need to be changed. So I've often run in companies, I'll just very basic one. A company wants to change their pricing model. They often will create a model or a consulting team will come in and create a model, but in fact, they haven't actually done an assessment on whether the software, the billing software, can actually accommodate and becomes a limitation. So there is very often companies will create a pricing approach or a model, but they run into implementation and execution issues because there are other systemic issues that they had to deal with before they could implement it, or even if they could at all.
Right. So in a lot of cases, like you're saying, you're finding a lot of times one department tries to take on the problem, right, or the solution with just no connection to the rest of the organization, right? And that can happen in either direction, right? Either engineering says, hey, great, I can solve this problem, but does it really solve it from the value perspective, from the pricing standpoint, where the customers are going to perceive value?
Right.
And the other way, right? Like, great, we're going to segment up the product this way, and we're going to do these things, but then there's no way from the solution to be able to turn on and off those features to even be able to deliver it in the way that has been dreamt up by the commercial team.
Right. And so think about that. If I do, like, I'm benchmarking my competitors, or I'm doing pricing research and looking to optimize, looking for optimized prices versus my competitors, none of that ties back to what you just described, right? It doesn't actually solve that problem. It gives you something about prices, but it actually is really kind of a rolled around to commoditization and what price can I get away with. But it doesn't address all those other things that are going on. So there's a lot of information you can learn from pricing that can be used elsewhere in the business, but that's not the way it's treated today. Right?
Yeah. Well, I guess you'll probably see a lot of copycatting right out there, where it's like, oh, great. Hey, Clay is the talk of the town on the way that they're segmenting up their pricing and doing these things. We should be doing the same sort of thing in our business. But that, is there value in your business to be priced that same way?
I think a lot of startups go that path, right? They instead of spending a lot of time thinking about pricing, they copy. Well, they find out what was successful someplace else, and then they start copying. Everything became SaaS for a while, and then now everything's becoming tokens, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's not that they've thought through how they can monetize their particular value that they're creating on the product side. It's just that they're creating something that looks like something a competitor does, and they use some kind of monthly SaaS pricing, or that type of behavior happens quite a bit.
Right. Or this company out here got to Series D funding, so I'm going to do this the same way, so I can hopefully ride on their coattails to get my series whatever next round in mind.
That's exactly what happens, and for good reason, right? Because the SaaS, I know from SaaS, the valuations of those businesses, the multiples were much higher than like perpetual licenses. If you're a more mature business, you're dealing with a whole different series of issues, and that gap between product and pricing is even further apart. They're like large functional areas that don't actually ever meet, or I don't actually, they may meet. I just don't know where that happens right now. I'm finding the biggest groups out there, surprisingly, are driving some of the work that we're doing is our CTOs. And
Right.
AI is bringing the CFO even more involved in the whole discussion, as you can see in the news. So
Yeah.
that break between creating value and capturing value is really becoming like a very big topic, a high priority topic for CFOs and in the large corporations now. In a small firm, they're almost always, next to each other, although they don't probably talk the same language.
Yeah. So it's okay. You run into these companies and you've got kind of like this commercial architecture and you've got this solution architecture. Can you talk to me a little bit about how kind of Applied Frameworks tries to get a kind of a reconciliation between these two?
So I can talk about our solutions, but I think I'll just talk about the discussions that we want people to have. You can think about it. And I've always thought about pricing this way is for my as a business, where am I investing my dollars? Because if I'm investing something, then I'm expecting some kind of return. And that has a really understated influence on how you actually go and build it or design a new pricing model. So if I'm investing a lot of money in a feature, then I expect an ROI. How am I going to go capture that piece? That discussion actually doesn't happen in one place. It often is thrown over the fence to the pricing team, say, you didn't create this problem, but now you got to come up with a solution about how we're going to do this. And that's been the case for many companies for a long, long time, right? So the Applied Frameworks is saying, let's try and bring those things. Where are you investing money? And do you understand, when you're making that investment, do you understand the commercial architecture that's going to actually allow you to capture what you're creating? And that may change how you prioritize the features that you produce. And that goes all the way back to the innovator's dilemma, right? So that is a pattern that has been around for a long time and has not changed. There is no software solution out there for having those things. So solving that, putting them on the same page, or integrating the investment decision with the commercial piece and saying, this one has a higher probability of generating more revenue, not just profitability, but just more revenue because it's creating a lot of value and we can capture it this way.
Yeah, well, it's the classic conversation, right? Sales is out in front of the customer and we don't have feature X. We don't have feature X and we need feature X. And the business asks sales, great, how much net new sales are you going to sign up to in order to pay for the investment and the ROI on the delivery of feature X, right?
Right. So, but a commercial thinking or architecture version of that would be, well, here's the revenue. Who are you going to sell it to? What are the segments that you're going to sell to? How much revenue can we drive through there in terms of the sales? How much profitability can we drive in through there in sales? And you can see it's a circular conversation. The image behind me is the profit stream canvas, and that systems thinking. It says, okay, so let's not just create this circular discussion. Let's break it up into its nodes and solve for each one. And when you add them all up together, you now have a profit stream for that feature. And you can say, okay, so we can actually sell this to 3 or 4 different segments and package it different ways. And it's not just one sale because some large customers said, I need this feature. It's actually, we're going to build this and we're going to sign up the organization because we're all in the same room together.
Yeah.
The commercial side and the product side, and we're signing up for generating revenue this way and profit this way, and that'll drive the ROI on that feature.
Right.
I think it sounds like we should have been doing it all along, but the fact is that people, pricing sits downstream, or even in a startup, it's not a high priority to come up with a pricing model early on. It's just, build the product and don't invest your money in that, pricing effort.
Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
sounds a lot more of like a collaborative business approach
Yeah.
versus the toss the problem over the fence to the whichever side of the business to deal with the challenge, right?
Yeah, I had a client 2 years ago where we got this is a sort of $80 million a year software company, just got their Series D. And we opened up a profit streams project with them, and brought in by the product team, the new head of product, and brought in there, and we started talking about customer benefits and what we call what's the exchange of value and between us and the customer. So how are we going to bill them? Like we're going to monthly or per usage. And after the first hour, and we had all the executives join the first 2 hours, and they got into this discussion, and they said, you know what, we've never had this conversation before. Right? We've had product team meetings, and the CEO is there, and then we've had pricing discussions with sales there, but we've never talked about what our pricing strategy, the design, the commercial architecture actually looks like for all these products that we've built and features. What I saw just recently was companies. This is it's a much smaller startup, building feature just to keep up with the market. And every time a feature came up, they put a price on it. And eventually we got to cost plus. And now we have 17 metrics with 8 different products, and we're selling it feature by feature instead of a solution. And now we have to re-architect all of that. And we did just recently around repackaging and repricing model to catch up with the product team, with the product and how it was built. But it was built just like that because that's how a company gets going. And they ended up with a cost plus model and essentially at the end of the day, which was really complex for customers to buy because there were so many metrics involved just to get to one. Just to buy to spend more with us, they had to take on another metric and another, right, and just more. And they got to the point, though they will get to the point which another client of mine just recently had, which is the customers could not understand where their budget was going.
Yeah.
They couldn't forecast how to budget, so they stopped using the product, or they stopped increasing the usage of the product, which is not the behavior that you want to create. So that ultimately there's a really good example of a really big problem you could create, is that the customer just gets to the point where they just don't want to use any more of it because they're not sure how to budget for it or what it's going to cost them at the end of the day, right? It's unpredictable. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of at the end of the day, you're selling it to somebody, like you said, who has a budget. There's a budget and it needs to fit within that spending allowance that's been set aside to be able to do it. And if you can't show to the finance organization there that I am going to be inside your budget, it's a real tough sell, right? Like, and you can try to make the argument of, well, you're getting so much value from our product that even if you are paying more over your budget, that you're getting that intrinsic value back. But you need to be very crisp on what that real value is that they would be accepting of going over budget because it impacted some other kind of downstream net new revenue. Like, it's a really tough conversation.
It is, and it's complex. And I said it earlier, it's increasingly complex when you put these two things together. But if you don't solve it, then you're asking your customer to solve it, which is what you just described, and that goes sideways pretty quickly, right? So we either, I don't know, we start discounting or we don't get the sale, right? And we don't get the sale, and they'll come back and say it was because of the price, right?
Yeah.
But we all know that's not actually, that's just the check the box type thing. It's not really what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. When it's the price is, I couldn't come up for a price that I felt was the right amount of spend for the value that I was getting out of however which way that you've sectioned it up for me, right? That there wasn't enough value in it. So, yeah.
So I think you point to a really important thing, which is it ultimately comes down to that signaling or conversation with the with the sales team has with their customer. You to close the deal. That's the ultimate performance. You could talk about profitability, but ultimately it's that dialogue that they have and how long it takes and how quickly they close the deal, and so much of that is influenced by decisions that are made upstream of that conversation, all the way back to the products, like I said, that we build in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'd mentioned in there too, like one of the examples was, that the startup that was just building feature after feature after feature after feature, right? And I think, one of the concepts that I've been talking to people more and more, right? It used to be pricing. Okay, great. We'll set your pricing and we'll come back and we'll revisit it in a year from now. Where today, because the evolution of your software and the modules that you're putting in there, this is a constant conversation to be having internally and having the right frameworks to do this, because you get into this scenario where now, am I out of alignment from what I'm offering from my feature functionality from the way that I'm pricing it at a certain point? Right. And I'm curious what you see happening there and kind of symptoms or the ways that you tackle this disconnect between the two.
So yeah, historically what I saw is products evolved, but the pricing doesn't. So the products are evolving and the pricing model stays exactly the same. So as you add features or you create more value, you're still the commercial side is still trying to capture it in exactly the same way. And I've seen this again. I go back to observations and patterns. I've seen this in hard, manufacturing companies, and I've seen this in software companies. And the one, it ultimately evolves to the point where there's so many exceptions start to accumulate, like discounting starts to increase rapidly. That's something you'll see pattern wise, or the number of exceptions that the sales are asking for increases. And that I've called that drift, where the product side of the organization is drifting away from the commercial side of the organization. It shows up in lots of different ways. You'll see in sales transactions, because of those exceptions, you'll see scatter plot of different realized prices, not our list prices, but what we're actually capturing at the day. You'll see similar customers buying the same product but paying vastly different prices, or big customers getting smaller discounts than little customers, right? And you think that can't be true. That's not that's actually happens almost universally, a pattern I see from company to company to company. So when you start thinking about, well, where do I start fixing that, right? And that's why the canvas helps you figure out where to start fixing it, because I've run into companies where they know all this is happening, they're totally aware of it, but they don't know where to start fixing it because they've changed prices or they've changed discount policy. But in fact, there's a larger misalignment that's been created over time, and it slowly increments through the business. This is my experience, right? It slowly gets the business to the point where they hire a consulting firm and they go through a big pricing transformation project. And it's a one-time event. It costs them $500,000 to go through it. They subsequently put in pricing software, but the system itself hasn't changed, and the people aren't talking about this, what you discussed, any differently than they were previously. So after a year or 2 years, guess where that scatter plot comes back, and it looks exactly the same again. It drifts out of alignment. And to your point, all of that is speeding up. It's the time that your models, your product life cycle, and think about pricing as your product life cycle. Those are shrinking very rapidly these days, and so these decisions have to be made even faster. And you can fall out of alignment. That drift is going to happen even faster.
Yeah,
and it's a very painful process. So therefore, whenever a company like mine walks in and says, oh, we're going to see fix your pricing, and we're probably going to see, bottom line margin improvement of 10%, and people just laugh and say, there's no way. And I'd say, well, I look at this diagram, you're so out of alignment. This is actually not that hard for someone like me to come in and do it, right? We don't want that to happen. We want the investments to be made better with a commercial alignment, so we don't actually go through all this complexity.
Yeah. Well, I guess like you'd called out earlier too, like then the rapid evolution of this, right? Like the AI world is a great example. You called out like the tokens, credits, these sorts of things, and the amount of experimentation that is going on to try to find some kind of pricing that sticks to value over top of different pieces. I'm curious of what you're seeing in those sorts of trends and any parallels you might have seen in the past around it.
So I see a lot of testing, like A/B testing going on, and that's been the traditional world. It's kind of they'll try different things. I was really impressed when that all started. You could rapidly try different things. I think Dell Computer was really good at this, right? Dell would have an offer sit out there with all these metrics, and if it didn't hit those metrics in the first half hour, they'd change the offer, right? Really, really rapidly. Great idea, right? Doesn't really work at all in B2B, right? It maybe works in a lot of consumer stuff, but that was a well thought out design and process that wasn't just rapidly testing. They were rapidly changing their product offers and their pricing at the same time. It was integrated. To what I see mostly today is we just want to solve this pricing thing quickly. I actually heard a podcast by someone, an entrepreneur, speaking at one of the bigger business schools as a lecturer, and his comment the other day was, pricing was the most complicated business problem he ever had to deal with, but his recommendation was to go out onto the internet and look for pricing models. And I was, really, the most complicated business problem you ever run into, and what we should do is go out and look for public information on pricing. There's a lot of information out there. How to use it is you need to know a lot more than what that person was saying. We're trying to lower the barrier to you start thinking about that discipline, and not just the pricing team. You don't even need a price team. You've got the engineering group and the product group. If they're actually starting to make those decisions with the commercial architecture mindset, if they start blending those things in, and we do the canvas we do training on each one of these things, people move up very quickly and start getting the ideas. And maybe they need tools to help them, but they just, like you said earlier, they just need to start talking about these things together. And it's amazing what you can uncover really rapidly. And I say amazing. I am always impressed with every team I work with, how quickly we get to these realizations and how quickly people absorb them. But you got to make it accessible. You come in with a massive pricing consulting project, and you're already at a disadvantage to getting people on board because they're expecting you to deliver the answer instead of them working on how to create the answer and make decisions, because the time is short, right? They're going to have to revisit this and prevent that drift, in 6 months, in 8 months, and not a year maximum, right?
Yeah.
And I giving people that knowledge is really, I think it makes a big change versus a big transformation project down the road. And I also said, like, the idea of drift is real. It's observed. It's companies who have put off that decision for such a long time because it just felt so complex. It's such a massive change but then they get to the point where they have to do a massive change. Yeah.
Well, and I guess like drift, well, in general, one of the challenges is cost, right? Infrastructure cost. How am I managing things? What's my margin sitting on top? So as you drift and add new thing, is your costing the same? Is it not? Typically, new features don't come without a cost.
Right.
That's behind them as well. And finance is sitting there with their margin calculator, taking a look at deal margins and where we're going. These I'm curious, as you're walking through, the framework and working through these with customers, where and how does cost of infrastructure come in? I know you mentioned a couple clients went and found themselves in a cost plus model, but then that can get complicated. That sits on top. I'm just curious on where that infrastructure, especially like in the AI side of things. It started off really free and cheap and don't worry, and now they're actually billing for the use and what it takes, and now my costs are going up underneath that. So I'm just curious on how that gets bantered around between the different teams.
So AI, I'll start with AI, because AI isn't just changing products, it's changing and the business economics and how we adapt to the changing business economics. And I mentioned that company that does the cost plus, right? The added features. One of the features they moved on from standard products to AI enhanced projects and enabled products to now agentic. So they've got a sequence going on. It's a really great journey that they're building, right? They have to take their customers through it, the temptation is to recover costs. Two areas of cost. One is there's the infrastructure. Then there's the cost to serve, right? So whereas the standard products, the customers expected the prices to go down over time. You got AI enabled ones, now prices are going up over time because there's a cost to serve element to it that has to be recovered some way, and tokens have become the economic model for doing that, right or wrong. That's just what happens. That's how you quickly put a pricing model in place. You create tokens. The difference is, and this happens when I realized I was building a model that included agentic, is the value that you're creating is actually increasing over time. So the standard product where the costs are going down, the customers expected costs to go down, those were depreciating value. AI is appreciating value. How do you capture that appreciating value? And so the cost economics is kind of the wrong discussion. It's important. It can be factored in. But the more of, like the one example I did for this customer, we actually ended up with, instead of talking about transactions and tokens, we started, what's the percentage of your workflow that the agent is doing for you? And because you're going to save all that money on your staff and systems and stuff doing that work. And we're actually coming in and we're going to do the work for you. What is the value that we're creating? That's the discussion. We created an ROI tool that actually calculated that, early days. So we'll see how that matches up against the customer database. But now I'm doing workflow for you. If I can grow my business now by doing more parts of the workflow for you, doing more within the workflow for you, you can see how that economics changes. And so their customers aren't going to object to their spend going up. Their spend's going up because we're doing more of the workflow for you, not because our costs are there. And my tokens and costs as a business may be going up, but that's way less than the value I'm creating for my customer on the other side. And that goes back to 25 years ago, how we got into value-based pricing. That's not new. AI is forcing this issue through and getting us out of these old bad practices. And I'm not sure this is the case in every situation, but if you're using tokens as your model, then you're kind of in that cost plus mindset, which is the same as a manufacturing company in 1955. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you copy, then that's what you're going to end up with. Yeah.
Right. And I guess a really good way of framing it, right? That my price increases are due to increased value that I'm providing. The side effect of that is, yeah, I've had increased costs underneath, but that was the cost of me providing the extra value, right? It wasn't the driving force of the price increase. It was a side effect of me providing more value to my customer, right?
And now you and I as a customer, we can learn this together. So it's not just the pricing model. The pricing sends signals, the metrics provide learning on how it's being used, what I'm replacing, all those things. So it's early days. I think companies may not be brave enough to go with true outcome-based pricing, and customers are probably not ready to, they don't know how to budget for that, right? And they're already risk averse already. So, but you can put in a model in place and learn as this evolves, because if you're putting in an agent, or it has to be refreshed, right? There's so much, turning that into a learning model. We learn to commercialize this over time. We learn, and you got customers buying into that, then that's the ideal situation, right?
Nice.
So at the end of the day, what pricing is not just data. Pricing is a signal to the marketplace about your value proposition, where you want to be positioned in the marketplace, how customers respond, and the sales you create, and all the data that's captured there. Those are all signals back to the business as to how they're creating value and who values what. And so you can start changing behavior and segmentation, and influencing your product roadmap, which is not the way things are. We're not using those signals today.
Right.
It also, to your point, Tim, just to wrap that around, because it just occurred to me, is it's also internal signals. Everybody's getting this, they're aligning their own behavior by collaborating more, because the business is telling them to respond to these signals they're getting back from the marketplace.
Yeah, perfect. I think maybe we wrap up the conversation with a little bit of information that maybe you can provide about how Applied Frameworks is building software to help companies work through these challenges.
Right. So we started we wanted to get out of consulting and into software. We didn't know what that meant. Right. And then one of the founders, Luke Homan, is a fellow of Scaled Agile, or SAFe. So this is the, enterprise level software architecture and design projects. And we got back into that through a software solution. And now we're expanding to say, well, we're not just talking about SAFe training and SAFe courses. We want to influence more of the CTO and product group, and how they're actually making decisions about what they take to market, because we wrote this pricing book. But we're going from software design. We're moving to software companies, have spent decades mastering solution architecture, and we think the next category is merging that with the commercial architecture. And so we're evolving, software-wise, we're evolving along those lines. We're saying, okay, let's go do a little bit more around how product managers are investing their money and making better investment decisions. Now the next evolution is we're going to marry that with the commercial architecture side. And so they make those decisions even better. There is no category or software category that does that today. I think it's a big problem. It's just, and it sits in different, as I said, the big companies, it sits in different parts of the organization. But I think the CTO and the CFO really become the place where designing how value is captured will have the same discipline and married discipline with how we architect software today.
Yeah, it's every single company
Yeah.
struggles with
Right.
this, right? Like, and anything that can be done and bringing in your expertise and, you know, the applied frameworks group in there to be able to help them work through this, like not once, but as a practice is amazing.
Well, there's any CTO or CFO out there that would be interested in this conversation, you know, we're looking for people to talk to and dialogue, because my personal struggle is finding the right person in the company to talk to, because it doesn't sit in one person's budget today, right? So, and I don't want so anyway, I don't know if you got any ideas on that.
Yeah, it's always
I'm sitting. Yeah, it's not. I think it's great to talk about these things, and I think we've found that big problem that we're trying to solve. Got to get that conversation dialogue going. Yeah.
Well, and then hopefully this video lands in front of those groups, right? Because like you said, it's not necessarily one department in certain organizations, but there'll be somebody that is driving this internally in those businesses going, we need to solve for this. And whether they're coming from finance, product, you know, the technology side of things, it'll be like, we need to solve for this because we've got a disconnect in the business.
Well, that's a really good point. And we want to enable those people we want to find, you know, and not have to take on a huge, you know, massive transformation project, but let's just start getting the dialogue. Let's make it accessible. Let's start thinking through. We'll build this software as we learn, observe more and more, and ultimately it'll evolve into this solution. Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, I think maybe we'll wrap it there for this episode, Kevin. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience and what you're doing. Like I said, this is a challenge that every company out there is dealing with right now, and it's fantastic that we've got folks like you in the community to be able to help people out in these situations.
Tim, I really deeply appreciate the time.
Yeah. Wonderful. Great. Thanks, Kevin.